For me, the question of what was the time in my life that I tried the hardest is actually a pretty easy one to answer because there was so much on the line in my mind in high school when one of the most important things to me was kind of my performance and how I performed in sports and kind of finding my self-worth in that. And so I don't want to throw myself under the bus or my past self. Like it was genuinely important, and it just makes what's important to me now all the more meaningful. But I was so hungry for validation, and it was actually this beautiful arc, and I'll kind of explain why that arc wasn't completed in other ways. But I loved soccer. That was really my sport growing up. And I was good. I wasn't really that good, and it took a little bit of time to come to terms with that. But imagine back to 2013, I'm under 100 pounds and I'm trying to play soccer, don't make the JV team. And, it's hard. It's just, I thought that I could. I really thought that that was going to set me on the right track in high school to kind of, you're already starting up a leg and, people will notice that. But instead I'm playing on this freshman team, and there's just not a lot of glory in that. And, so I'm kind of down on myself about that. And I remember even during that first soccer season and shortly after my freshman year, it was just really how can I do better to avoid the embarrassment of it? So it's always just this do better. And so I start running around the neighborhood, which I don't really do that much. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to take this seriously, I should get ready in the off season. And so I ran track, and it was weird. I was training with these sprinters, just trying to find myself. And I thought I was going to sprint during track, but I ended up running distance. And the way I always put it is I had one of the assistant coaches on the track team, kind of gruff guy, but really had a lot of love in his heart that I didn't see at the time. And he was like, hey, did you play soccer on the varsity team? And I was like, no. And he was like, they probably weren't that good. You should run cross country instead. And it's okay, he obviously has, motive to get me on his cross country team. But it's I couldn't even hear anything in his voice other than someone's kind of bigging me up and saying that I can do this thing and maybe I'll succeed in this. And it was just this real hunger for validation. And so I kind of, I don't know, again, I'm not mad about it, but I kind of gave up on my sport of soccer in pursuit of this potential validation. And so I'm running cross country. And so I get my varsity letter my freshman year in track, and then the following fall I'm running cross country. And it's it's just this reality where you can't blame anyone else other than yourself, because it's just a time. It's a time. And sometimes the time goes down and sometimes the time goes up, and it's really frustrating when the time goes up and, there's opportunities to scapegoat and be like, oh, well, it was an off day, or it was bad weather, or this course was really tough and everyone hates it anyways. No one PRs. But now, imagine, kind of arbitrary goals. I mean, this exhibits in any discipline. You talk about, benching 2 plates, 225. Why is 225 any different than 220 or 224? And it's well, first off, it's really hard to bench 224 because weights are usually in increments of 5. But then also it's just this that's two wheels, 2 full plates. Same thing in track or cross country, It was a historical phenomenon of the 4-minute mile. Gosh, I'm kind of a yapper, this is kind of story time, but it's a demonstration of how my mind works. But so I kind of set this goal. I was oh wow, I have to get under 18 minutes in the 5K. This metric measurement, 5 kilometers, it doesn't even matter for us Americans that much, I'll say. But so I'm working at this, and I run 18:01 my last meet of my sophomore year, and I'm just so disappointed because I thought I hit it, and one of my favorite coaches was like, yeah, you got it. I saw when you crossed the finish line, the clock said that. But then, automated electronic system comes in and it's like you run 1801.6. Junior year kind of flopped. I think I gave up in a lot of ways. It was a tough time. So this is where we're finally going. Senior year, also off to a bad start. I'm not hitting the times that I used to, but I'm getting better. The team's a lot more competitive than it was, but like I already had my varsity letter, and so I think in a lot of ways my drive went away because it's like, well, what's the point? Now it's just a number. And I wasn't even running on the varsity team. That's how, like, we just had a lot of talented young cats on the team. And so it was a real grappling of just like, okay, well, it's just me. There's no like, ooh, like I'm going to win this glory or like contribute to this bigger thing. 'Cause I'm just like running for kicks at this point. And I get this sense, I think, as we do often in life, that it's just like, man, like time is running out. Like I don't really have that many races left. And to know that like my best time in the 5K at this point was like 2 years ago. And by the way, my fastest time in the mile and the 2 mile was the first time I ran those races my freshman year. I ran those races. I was so hungry for that varsity letter, and I never got better. That's like an incredibly difficult recipe to cook with, like, and just to accept. It was just like, gosh, like what's the point? And I'm not really contributing to team, whatever team is. And now it's just, I'm getting caught up, and it's just like, why am I doing this? And as much as I would love to spin the story as like, yeah, so like I really realized all of this and I really buckled down and I trained and then I finally hit my time. Like, spoiler, I hit my time, but it was not nearly that conscious as it is now in retrospect or in reflection. Like, it was the second last race I ever ran. It was a pretty easy course, but I think that day, like, it was the regionals, and you're not necessarily competitive with your teammates, but I knew that like if I was the fastest on the JV team, then I would get to run at states if we made it to states. I also just knew that like, okay, this is the day. And so I pushed. And what's hard about these racing sports is that you can always push more. I think unless you're like an ultra athlete and you really know your limits, like the limit testing idea of like truly knowing how far you can go. I don't think I ever reached that. But, on this day, I was like, this is the opportunity. And I think, again, that's why I say, like, I have no doubt that I pushed myself as hard as possible. Like, there was almost like this, like, letting out of life of, like, my mouth when I crossed the finish line. It wasn't like this, like, gasp for air or, like, this, like, triumphant, like, let's go. Like, it was just like, it's kind of like, okay, I have, like, left it all out on the table. And so I kind of like, I was thinking about telling the story kind of in a glamorous way, but like as I revisit it, as vividly as I can in my mind, like, again, not to be hard on myself, but it wasn't like this like hero's journey, but it was a meaningful thing to finally hit this goal that I'd been after. And in other ways, again, in the 1 mile and 2 mile, in this entire 4-year career in track, like I never improved, and that was incredibly difficult. And my senior year of track, so kind of like my final semester, I quit like a third of the way into the season. Kind of made an excuse. I had sprained my ankle and I was going to be out for a week. There's still like 2 months left of the season. I just told coach like, hey, I'm done. I don't even think I went to like the banquet that year. So it's like, I guess to give myself some grace, I think after getting the varsity letter, and after finding meaning in a lot of people, especially my last year of high school, I think I started to see a little bit of the vapid nature of basing my self-worth or like needing my validation through the sport. I'm definitely not an athlete. I'm not a competitor. Like, I don't have that competitive drive in many ways. Like, I'd much rather like go through things ironically than like unironically, and like really like be in my business and like just grind it out sort of thing. Like that's not how I go. It's just it's always like me versus myself, but there's no more validation. So it was interesting to see that whole story of in a lot of ways I just tell people, yeah, I ran cross country in high school and yeah, here was my PR, but there was a lot more self-discovery through that, not through the most conventional route of like starting at the beginning and then rising to the top. It was a lot of like starting at the top in terms of like my ability, and then like slowly realizing like how futile it is in relationship to like the vastness of life. That like I was never meant to just be a runner and nothing else. Like I don't really knock people that are one trick ponies. That, in a lot of ways I'm jealous of people that like know what their gift is and they specialize like crazy. But like I'm very much on the opposite of that spectrum of just being like a jack of all trades in the truest sense. And it's cool to see kind of the lesson I learned through running, that it's just like, I can't be a number. And if I'm just chasing a number, and that was my time, but I guess now if that's like income or money or like any sort of like metric, like that's going to leave me perpetually hyper focusing on the digits instead of seeing how like, the digits or whatever stat it is like can serve me. And so, I'm insanely interested in statistics, but I think now I see how small of a place, my 5K cross country PR serves to like the grander picture of, the experience of life. That's my story.